Hello, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be doing an episode 3 review of the season 2 of Rings of Power. Okay, as always, I'm just going to read from my notes. Let's get into this. So the episode begins with a little flashback, and we see the Númenóreans, and they haven't left Middle-earth yet, and Isildur's horse isn't listening to anybody, so they release it. Now, it runs off to find Isildur, who is still alive, which is obvious, because despite their efforts to make you think that Isildur was dead on the season 1, when he got crushed by the house, he is not dead, because we know he dies in the river later on when he's a bit older, after he picks up his father's sword, I think it's the father's sword, the helm, and then cuts off Sauron's finger. So the horse is ambushed by orcs, and the horse becomes the best fighter of this series so far by taking on 4 orcs and surrounding orcs. After fending off the orcs, Isildur's horse runs into the Black Forest, where apparently nothing comes out alive, which is a lovely little cliche of movie and TV shows to say. Isildur, his horse, and I believe later Estrid all seem to come out of the Black Forest alive. Now, you might be wondering why this place is so bad, and that's because of the overgrown spiders. Now, this scene was not the best for people with arachnophobia. I think they made it very scary with the big spiders. For one, its horrible legs, and watching its legs kind of cling all on Isildur as he tries to throw the spider off, and the spider's, it just like clings onto him and does not let go, and then it was horrible. Good action scenes though, and the horse does eventually run away again. Just from the cave, not forever. They're also in a nest, it would appear. But anyway, Isildur survives and he leaves. Then we cut back to Númenor, and we're at the king's funeral. Eärien, which is the daughter of Heimdall, she says about dead kings and mentions Isildur, like future dead kings, as in for some reason Isildur being future dead king. But she says that Elendil shouldn't blame himself, true blame lies elsewhere, as in with the Queen Regent Miriel. Now this foreshadows how a lot of people in Númenor don't agree that their Queen Regent should have gone to Middle-earth and taken their family with them to die in Middle-earth, especially for the sake of Middle-earth and the elves. Because remember, Númenóreans do not like the elves. Right, Miriel is no longer the popular choice, except to those who went to war with her. This is later echoed when a woman slaps Miriel in the face during her father's funeral. Miriel takes that slap, though, and acts with grace, choosing not to punish, but to understand the anger and embrace the woman, something Pharazôn doesn't like because it makes her look more empathetic and is slowly turning the higher-ups of Númenor back onto the Queen's side, whereas he wants them not to be on her side because he wants them on his own. Later, Pharazôn then asks Miriel which dress colour to wear for her coronation, crimson for the future or white for the past. Both important words because, you know, when they connotate on this show, it is with reason, and he's obviously saying that if you wear the white, it's the past and was not what the people want, whereas crimson is the future. So Miriel chooses white because she says her father wore white. It's a more humble colour, and she remembers an eagle come to her father's coronation, which then Pharazôn says that is something that is rare to happen. Pharazôn says the eagles are an auspicious omen if it were to appear. Also, Pharazôn says that he's partial to the red crimson colour because it signifies a new leader, a new day, and that people need change. This is important later. However, Miriel chooses to remain with the white colour. Later, at a bar in Númenor, in like the more working class area, Eärien, Kemen, Pharazôn, and a guard captain, I think, they're all sat around talking, and they say that much of the people believe Pharazôn should be in power, that much of the land of Númenor is still his to claim. They see Miriel's decision as warmongering and want her out of power. Eärien says, what if someone knew a way to turn many into enough? Now, she is talking about the Palantry here, which is the one that was hidden in the King's Tower from Season 1 that Miriel goes to find. Obviously, this is an elvish design, and people of Númenor do not like elves, so this is their plan later on, which becomes important. But that is what Eärien is referencing, the Palantry. And also, Eärien knows this will actually turn the people who remain on the Queen Regent's side against her. Their conversation is interrupted by Valandil, though, which is Isildur's friend from Season 1, the soldier. Kemen says quite smugly that the soldiers weren't invited to the funeral, and he does this in a way that is suggesting that he's above Valandil, and this is clearly a sign of the dynamic in Númenor, where the thinkers or smart people are treated as higher class citizens and soldiers are treated as lower class citizens. Kemen and Valandil fall out when Valandil says about how he was surprised Kemen was invited to the funeral himself, as in, you also belong with us, don't pretend you're better than us. He then points out that the Queen and himself fought in Middle-earth and they bled together to save lives, and the Queen went blind, going into an inferno to save Aerion's brother's life, Isildur. So obviously, I think the soldiers are all firmly on the Queen's side, and divisions are happening in Numenor. It's the soldiers and the Queen versus the Thinkers and Pharazôn at this point. Also, at this point, Aerion has slight guilt, I think, when Lindel points out that the Queen went blind trying to save her brother, as in out of everyone in Numenor, Aerion should really not be trying to betray the Queen. Then we cut to Adar and the orcs, who again display this unusual and unseen side, where we once again humanize them as the orc commander questions Adar about going to war. He says, "Must we go to war again?" I'm not sure about orcs in the books, but it seems like this season the orcs are getting really quite human, which I don't think they should be because they're orcs. But maybe I'm wrong, maybe in the books they are more human or more free thinking. But here we are seeing free thought, worries, dread, fatigue, families, and it's unusual. So I ask, is it needed? We're spending obviously quite a lot of time on orcs this season, and I think it's to help with Adar's storyline within this show. And to some extent, I guess it's interesting to see these orcs having dread. And I say fatigue because they clearly are fatigued about going back to war, since they have just been and they don't want to go back, and they want to have downtime with their families, it would seem. So whilst Tolkien's work is complex and his characters are also complex, do we need this from the orcs? Do we really want fully fleshed out orcs with feelings and emotion and stakes in the game, especially when we're so used to just seeing them be killed and then we don't care? But this time round, they're trying to say that we should feel sad or perhaps bad when the orcs do die because they won't return back to their families. Interesting. This is actually where we also see the orc family after he says, "Do we need to go to war?" And then he himself goes to his own wife and child. And the orc baby is cute. But again, it makes me feel empathetic now towards orcs where I otherwise wouldn't have, nor would I wanted to, nor do I care. Usually. Except from now, when there's a little tiny baby orc who doesn't want his dad to die. But this moment is interrupted as Damrod comes to the camp, and this is a troll, I believe, who's killed the messenger orc. He asks where Sauron is. And he's also quite cool, but it is kind of cool to see, again, more world building, and it's nice to see the trolls be a bit more free thinking again, because again, in Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, when we do see trolls, it's like, oh, it's a cave troll, and it has no brains, and it can't speak, and it dies, even to some extent with the Goblin King and the Hobbit. Whilst he is smarter than the average orc or troll or goblin that we see within Peter Jackson's adaptation, he is still quite stupid. But here, this Damrod seems to think a bit more freely again as the orcs, and seems to want Sauron's return, or maybe he doesn't. Not sure, they don't return to it. But what they do is cut back to Eregion. Now we can see Disa and Durin have arrived, and Celebrimbor asks if they can give them more mithril to make rings of power to heal their mountain. But Durin doesn't trust Anatar at all, which is correct, I would say, because dwarfs are not so easily fooled because of their strong will. So I don't think he is going to fall as easily into Sauron's manipulation as Celebrimbor has done. So Anatar now tries to manipulate Durin, which again doesn't really work much, but this is why Durin doesn't trust him. He says how Elrond speaks so fondly of Durin, and that him and Celebrimbor, have brought the dwarves here so they can save their mountain, and that Durin can get back in touch with his father after saving the mountain and be back in the good books, essentially, for his dad. Durin, however, says, well, Elrond's never mentioned you, and this is why, again, he doesn't trust who Anatar is, because, Anatar has, spoken so highly of Elrond, who has never once mentioned Anatar, because Elrond, of course, has never met Anatar. And I think that Durin picks up on this. After a talk with Disa again, who once more tells him to get off his high horse, basically, for being too stubborn, she also has a funny line here when she said, I don't care if they're magic earrings, just do the rings, give them mithril, let's get the rings that start to help our own mountain again, because Disa is of definitely the interest of the dwarf people in Khazad-dûm to restore the mountain. I think this is probably coming from a bit of guilt that she couldn't save it with singing, as we saw in episode 2. Durin does agree then to speak to his father, and he's got no choice because Disa says she'll tell King Durin herself if Durin doesn't mention the offer from Celebrimbor. It then cuts to Anatar, and he is saying that he is losing time and patience, I think this is in fear that the High King Gil-galad will appear in Eregion and foil his plan to create more rings. It's here Celebrimbor, who is now fully manipulated and under Sauron's influence, decides to write to the High King a letter saying that he's closing the forge and congratulating the High King on the success of the 3 rings they've made prior. He promises to join the High King in Lindon as soon as possible. So my thoughts on this: if Halbrand has killed the elves, messenger ones now, who were originally warning that Halbrand is Sauron, did he not know that they were messengers? As in, on his way, did he just kill them because he wanted to, slip through into Eregion without being noticed by Gil-galad's elves? Would he have known that those elves were Gil-galad's elves? If he did know this and he had read the warning, then why would he now allow Celebrimbor to write back to Gil-galad, especially if Celebrimbor's message would have nothing to do with the High King warning that Halbrand is Sauron? So it's interesting to see if the message does actually get to Gil-galad, this one now, this letter that Celebrimbor's writing. It's going to be interesting to see if that does make its way to Gil-galad, and whether Sauron will actually allow this risk. Because you can see this in Anatar's face, I think, briefly, the wondering whether he'll actually allow this letter to make it out of Eregion. Then we cut to Isildur, and he's walking in the Southlands, I think in what will become the Dead Marshes, because if it isn't the Dead Marshes, there's that body underneath the water, and I think it's definitely a call to the Dead Marshes, if anything. Not long after this, Isildur is stabbed by Estrid in the thigh, and she is a lost traveller looking to find her way home. Now, Estrid says that she's already been to the first meeting place of the Southland people and the Númenóreans when they first decided to meet up after they lost the battle to go back to Númenor. Now, she says to Isildur that she's gone there and there were no ships. Then they find on this map and they see Pelagia, which is an old Númenórean fort. So Isildur thinks his father and the ships are still going to be waiting for him, but at Pelagia, no longer the first place that they said they were going to meet. So that is where Estrid and Isildur decide to go to. Whilst on their journey and whilst on their way to Pelagar, they are ambushed by Southlanders who are with Adar, and they are saved by Arondir, who makes his return to the series on the 3rd episode this time. Arondir then takes them safely with him to Pelagia, where there is a funeral being held for Bronwyn. That is right. Instead of the show creators realizing the actress didn't want to come back and making sure that her character could survive just off screen, they decided to instead off screen kill her. Now, in the industry, this can be considered as fridging, which is where typically a female character who is a love interest of a male character normally is killed for the sake of the male's character's storyline. So what that means is that this first came about with Green Lantern, where his girlfriend was killed, and that was the whole point of that story, that his girlfriend died and Green Lantern needs to get revenge on the person who killed his girlfriend. So yeah, I would class this as fridging because, as we see from this episode, both Theo and Arondir have no narrative for the rest of this show in this episode so far anyway. I'm only on episode 3, but so far in episode 3, those two characters have nothing to do other than to bury Bronwyn and then be mad about it and discuss her death, which they say she died from the arrow that she survived in the first season because orc magic or orc weaponry lasts longer in the human body, and that is why she has died. It's total crap. They have decided just to kill Bronwyn. Like fuck, the writers wanted to, kill her off with an arrow off screen that she survived in season 1. It's because the actress didn't come back, and as I say, instead of maybe making her go practice medicine in an elvish land, they decided it would be easier to kill her off. And I think to some extent that is because they now have no idea what to do with Arondir or Theo. As I say, Arondir's whole point in this episode is literally just to burn Bronwyn's body and then sulk about it. And Theo does a great deal of sulking and is literally only there to be annoyed that his mum's dead and then ask Isildur to come with him to go get his horse. Clearly, I think now, going forward, I haven't seen, obviously, episode 4 or 5, and they could both be in future episodes, but from the 3rd episode, nothing more happens with them. They are just sad and that Bronwyn's dead, and Arondir is clearly out for some sort of revenge storyline, and Theo is just going to be motivated again by his mother's death, which does fit into this category of fridging, where a female character dies, and whatever motivation the male characters get from a female's death, if that is the only storyline they've got going for them, I would class as frigid. And I can't believe the writers actually did this to Bronwyn. It's not good, not good at all. However, then we cut to the dwarfs, and we got back in Khazad-dûm. And here we learn that they only have enough resources left for 3 months, and that is it. The time will be up for them, and all of them will perish shortly after, if they don't fix their sun shafts. Durin is finally reunited with his father, and it's actually quite a touching scene to begin with anyway. Durin then says how Celebrimbor has a plan to make rings, which will save their mountain, and Durin also apologises to the king. Durin, however, has a good funny line here when he says, "You look terrible," and he does it such a deadpan delivery that does make you chuckle. Another touching moment, I think, between this scene of them reuniting was when the son, Durin, says to his dad, King Durin, that the miner's punches land hard, and then King Durin snaps back and says, "Wait till your children grow up." He's so funny. I really like King Durin, but as I think we can see from the trailers, I think that the ring is going to corrupt him as we see him push back Durin to the ground with so much force that it sends Durin flying. So I don't think good things are going to happen for these dwarfs at Khazad-dûm, and those of you who know more of the mythology or have watched the Lord of the Rings films will know that in the first film, one of the Fellowship mentioned to one of the hobbits that Khazad-dûm dug too deep and released the Balrog, which again we do see in this trailer. So I think that is going to allude to the fact in future episodes Khazad-dûm is going to be restored with these rings and then dig a little too deep and release the Balrog, which will kill all of them. And I, for the sake of this show, hope they don't get rid of Khazad-dûm so quickly. There's apparently a planned 5 seasons. We'll see if even a third one happens due to the series' low ratings. However, I think to get rid of Khazad-dûm in season 2 would be ridiculous, just as ridiculous as fridging Bronwyn. So back to the episode anyway. What Sauron is planning to do is obviously to topple these dwarfs' mountains. He obviously wants Celebrimbor to make 7 dwarf rings for the dwarf leaders. Again, power over flesh. But yet we also know, again, that the dwarf wills are too stubborn to be controlled. So no, we know that King Durin is not going to be completely controlled, but instead will become very rich and greedy. And as I say, in Khazad-dûm, they dig too deep through their greed and unleash a Balrog to destroy themselves. Other people, like Thorin's father, get corrupted by rings too, but I think their greed ensnails dragons like Smaug. Yeah. So anyway, Durin tells his father, King Durin, he doesn't trust the rings or Anatar, and he's now against them. So now we've got Elrond and the son Durin who are against these rings, and everyone else seems to want them for the gifts they bestow upon each realm. Then we cut back to the Southlanders, and it's a who's who of which these humans are on Adar's side and have been branded versus which people haven't. As we see, Estrid, after having a sappy talk with Isildur, takes her hair back, and we can see that she's been branded herself. Theo also, at this point, is pulled away Isildur because they're going to go off and get Isildur's horse, who for some reason has more plotline than Bronwyn in season 1. On the way to get the horse, they come across a Southlander camp, which is Adar's Southlanders, and a fight breaks out, although we don't see who is actually taking these people out, and I'm pretty sure this is going to be the Ents. Now, I'm pretty sure this is going to be the Ents because there's a shot that goes up, there's a crane shot, and it goes from Theo looking average height to being very small, and I think the only way that you're going to have a height like that is either a troll, which there would be roaring, or a tree, like an Ent, because they are Ents. Theo is either killed or kidnapped at this moment by whatever is taking them, again I think an Ent, and I think that would probably lead to Theo being kidnapped rather than killed, and potentially, whereas before I thought Nori and Poppy were the ones in the trailer talking to the Ents, I now think it might be Theo talking to an Ent in the next episode or a future episode. Otherwise, Theo is dead and that ends his storyline. Then we cut to Numenor, and we're at the Queen's coronation. She is wearing white, but Pharazôn is wearing crimson. Remember, in this episode, we already know that crimson represents the future, whereas white represents the past. White is humble, whereas crimson is the future, a change the people need. So, I think this is good storytelling through the use of costumes and symbols. Again, I love seeing this smart style of writing, the connotations of the colours they told us about already, and now who is wearing these colours. Miriel shows up to her own coronation in white, and Pharazôn is in crimson. Now this, for an audience, I think is very good, but it's very bad for Miriel. Too bad she didn't see that coming. I guess Elendil could have been like, hey Miriel, Pharazôn's in red. Interesting choice there. But he does not do that. Instead, he helps her up to the stand where the ceremony is beginning. Now, just to go back to the trailers, I think in part the trailers are spoiled a little bit too much, and I don't think we should have been shown the eagle. As Farazan said earlier, one to show up is rare, and I think that we should have been allowed to wonder along with the people of Numenor and Miriel and Farazan. I think we should have been able to wonder ourselves whether an eagle would have shown up, and I think they spoiled that for us in the trailer by showing us an eagle does indeed show up. But anyway, back to the ceremony. As Miriel goes to take the ceremonial staff, or whatever it is she has to hold in Numenor, someone shouts out, "Queen of Flies." Again, Miriel takes this in her stride with grace and understanding instead of being rude or angry, which she could have been as she is the Queen Regent, now about to be Queen. Another person shouts out that she's unfit to rule. So we've got Miriel's coronation along with some hecklers, and Farazan dressed in crimson. Muriel then speaks out about hearing their sorrow, their anger, their grief. She says that she shares it and that they have been bloodied and she was bloodied as well. And that together as a community, they've all been bloodied and shared in the grief of what happened in Middle-earth. She then here reassures them that they will find their cause. At this point, she has almost won enough of them back over to her side, much to Farazan's dismay. However, this is where she goes wrong because she opens up the room to allow others to speak of their grief, saying, "Firstly, ask yourself this, for whom do you cry out?" Now at this point, Aerion enters holding the Palantiri and says, "For Isildur," who of course she believes is dead. Aerion brings the Palantiri to the people's attention, blaming it for the reason that their king's men have died in Middle-earth. Now this is what she talked about earlier when she talked about turning much into many, because she knew that the king and queen regent had the elvish Palantiri, and she knew she was going to use that against Muriel during the coronation to win back people to her cause, which of course she's aligned with Farazan. So she says this is the reason that the king's men died in Middle-earth. This elf stone is your queen, which is such a little burn. Elendil then tries to silence Aerion by shouting loudly to shut up or to silence or something like that, but Aerion doesn't, and instead quite effectively drops the Palantiri down the steps towards the people, who back away scared. Farazan now says, "Lies! Numenor's true leader wouldn't put trust in an elvish artifact." He's basically waiting for Muriel to confirm she was using it. He's setting her up to fall at this point and trying to make her look untrustworthy and incapable of ruling to the higher class people. This works as Elendil tries to go and pick up the Palantiri and gets blasted back, at which point the people now go against Muriel and call her a sorcerer, Queen of Lies, and say dark magic. A fight amongst the people breaks out. It's the guards against the noble, and the noble people against Muriel, and noble people against other noble people. They've erupted into chaos, including one person who throws fire at Muriel, who can't see because she's blind. The crowd also stops Elendil from reaching out to Muriel, who unfortunately is blind and is trying to reach out to Elendil's hand, but instead gets grabbed by somebody else, which is quite sad because they know that the queen's blind and she was hoping that she would find Elendil's hand, but got grabbed by the angry mob. This is when it all looks very bad, and then the eagle cry is heard, at which point we should have been like, "Oh my god, an eagle is come to the ceremony, oh my god, this is meant to be auspicious omen," or whatever. But as I said, we knew from the trailer this eagle was arriving, and they robbed us of that moment to be aghast. I think now that this eagle is obviously coming from Muriel. But Farazan takes this moment to walk up to the eagle himself and claim that this is a sign that he should be the ruler, the true ruler of Numenor. And again, the captain that was in that little table in the working class pub then shout, "The eagle favours Farazan!" And just like that, all of the people in Numenor now believe so, and he is the new king, the usurper in crimson. Muriel usurped by her own people. Then we get the last shot of this particular episode when we cut to molten liquid pouring from the forge, as Anatar and Celebrimbor, along with King Durin, Disa and Durin, all stand and watch. King Durin holds a box that contains a small clump of mithril, which Celebrimbor takes and puts in Anatar's hand. Now this is where the mistake was made by Celebrimbor for these 7 rings, which I believe are for... It's either the 7 rings they're making or it's the 10 rings for the men. But I think considering they needed the deal with the dwarves to save their mountain, I think this is probably them making a batch for the dwarves rather than men. However, whereas Celebrimbor might have been putting good although manipulated, intentions into these rings. Anatar, obviously, as Sauron, and he does not have good intentions. And of course, he actually wants to have power over flesh and manipulate the dwarves. Now we see Anatar holding the Mithril, and he's definitely messing with it as he puts his influence into the Mithril and then drops it into the forge, which Durin's face says, "Oh dear," because Durin does not trust Anatar for good reason, and I think that he's understood Anatar is not to be trusted, and now he's got his intentions rather than Celebrimbor's intentions. And then that is where our episode ends. So far, I think that season 2 is going well. I think a few choices may have been a mishap. Bronwyn being fridged, probably not a good option to go there. And I think maybe potentially later on Khazad Dûn falling because they dig too deep and unleash a Balrog, destroying themselves. I hope that's not the case. I think if you're going to be doing 5 series, why are you destroying every place? Again, through future episodes, thanks to the trailers, we can see Eregion is under attack, and that's going to fall possibly too. So now we've left with season 3 potentially shaping up to be without Khazad Dûn or Eregion. So I guess maybe in these next, what are we on? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The next 5 episodes, I guess Anatar's going to have to be making the 10 rings for men and then the secret 1 ring. But at which point, why do we have 5 series rather than 2? Do we need 5? Probably not. Alright then, I think that I should go now. This concludes episode 3, and I will be watching episode 4, which I still haven't seen, and 5 this Thursday. I shall expect to do reviews for those later in the week. But until then, you can watch more of my episodes. If you haven't seen my review for episode 1 and 2, feel free to watch that. Or they are quite long videos, as I suspect this one might also possibly be. Until the next one anyway, thanks for watching, and bye.